Hello, friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Before we take you to your favorite Sports History Network show, just want to tell you a little bit about some merch that you can pick up that represents your favorite SHN podcast. So far, there's t-shirts, coffee mugs, and even books from some of the authors that do podcasts right here on SHN. Who could buy something better than that, than have the history right from the gentleman that you hear talking about it? But we also are adding things each and every day. And where's that store, may you ask? Well, it's at SportsHistoryNetwork.com. Up at the top, there is the SHN merch button. Click on that, it'll take you right to the store, and you can be representing your favorite podcast and show the world that, hey, on the swag that I'm using, it's the headquarters of sports yesteryear, Sports History Network, and my favorite podcaster, the Sports History Network store. Shop there today.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, old sports, and welcome to the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. Fall is upon us. It's October. It will soon be World Series time, which means it's time to talk about some baseball and some World Series history. And here to do that for you is my co-host, Andrew Newman, and myself, Dan Newman. We are the co-hosts of the Hello Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. We would like to encourage you all to check out the podcast on Facebook. Look us up, Hello Old Sports Podcast. You can email us at hellooldsports@gmail.com. You can check out the entirety of the Sports History Network at sportshistorynetwork.com. Buy some merchandise, buy yourself a Hello Old Sports t-shirt. A couple of my friends have actually done so already. I was at a party about a week ago with my friend Ken, and he stripped off his sweatshirt to reveal a Hello Old Sports t-shirt, and then showed me a picture of his wife wearing her Hello Old Sports t-shirt. So I'd like to thank and give a shout out to Jen and Ken and their family for listening to us every week when we put out these podcasts. It's always good to have friends. It's always good to have fans. And of course, it's good to have friends who are fans. So thank you to Jen and Ken and your lovely family, who I won't mention the kids' names, but just wanted to
Ben and Len.
Just wanted to thank you all for listening, and your family for always supporting the podcast with t-shirts too, apparently. So thank you guys very much for that. I am joined, as always, as mentioned, by my co-host Andrew Newman. And Andrew, how are you doing on this fine evening?
Well, after that concise intro, I'm doing very well. Right to the point. Yeah, it's good. The Yankees just tied this game at 1 as I'm sitting here listening to the beginning of the intro to this episode. These have been some of my favorite episodes, these ones we're going to do tonight, or the one we're going to do tonight, which is where we dive into a specific year. We've done 1920, we've done 1986, we've done at least one other one, haven't we, besides that? Well, kind of. We did the 80-81 Philly teams.
We've done 20. We've done 86. We did 41.
That's right.
We're going to do 82 later this year as a celebration of the 40th anniversary of my birth 40 years ago, 1982, 40-year birthday. And you're right. Then we've done sort of individual specific, a little more specific with Philly. And next year, I don't know if we've even talked about this, but next year we have to do, on its 25-year anniversary, we have to do 1998 because of the home run chase and the 98 Yankees and Jordan's last year with the Bulls and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, we've done quite a few of these. And tonight we'll just be talking about one aspect. We'll just be talking about the 47 World Series, but it is fun. Did you not realize that?
No, I did not. I have a lot of stuff we don't need to talk about.
Did you?
I have a lot of stuff here that's neither here nor there about the 1947, about hockey in 1947 and college football in 1947 that maybe we can zoom through to sort of set the stage. But for some reason, I had it in my head that we were doing the entire year 1947.
No,
but,
I thought I had explicitly said 47.
I'm sure you had. I'm sure you had. I'm sure I just misunderstood or just took a little bit of the context and wrote a bunch of stuff down. It's better than the alternative, though. If I had only looked at the World Series and hadn't looked at anything else, then we were talking about everything else, I'd be a little bit screwed. But I can make it work, but I'm just a little disappointed we won't get to talk about Johnny Lujack winning the Heisman Trophy, or the Joe Louis fight. Joe Louis with a fight where he basically acknowledged that he did not. He should have lost the decision against Jersey Joe Walcott in December of '47. That he won by a controversial split decision. The first college baseball World Series, Cal over Yale. You know who was on that Yale team?
George H.W. Bush.
George H.W. Bush on the team. We won't get to talk about Whipper Billy Watson losing the title to Lou Thez in the National Wrestling Association. We won't get to talk about any of that, and that's fine, because that's entirely my fault. And let's just rip out most of these pages and talk about the World Series.
Yeah, I thought that had been clear, but
I'm sure it was.
Well, it certainly wasn't.
You probably made it clear. I just didn't. I just ignored it, or got 1947 in my head and whatever. But all right, I'm ready now.
You know, there's only one thing I can say to you.
Nicely produced.
Wonderfully produced.
Well, I'm all right. We're fine. I'm a gamer. So who played in the 1947 World Series?
All right, so the 1947 World Series was the second ever. It's 75 years ago this year. It was the second ever World Series between the New York Yankees and the Brooklyn Dodgers. It was the fourth World Series that the Dodgers had ever been in. They had lost in 1916 to Boston. They'd lost in 1920 to Cleveland. And then in 41, with Leo DeRocher as the manager, they had gone to the World Series against the Yankees, lost in 5 games. A series probably most notably remembered for the dropped third strike by Mickey Owen in Game 4 with Tommy Henrich at the plate. Yankees win that game. They win Game 5 and go on to dominate the 1940s, much as they had the 1930s and the 1920s. The 1947 World Series, if you know anything about baseball, if you know anything about sports, or really if you know anything about America, 1947 obviously is Jackie Robinson. And so in addition to being Robinson's rookie year, it was also the first time that a black player appeared in the Major League World Series. And actually, there are actually 2 black players who appear in the World Series that year. It's not just Robinson, who starts and plays every game, but also a pitcher by the name of Dan Bankhead, who had been a star pitcher in the Negro Leagues and who actually only enters the game as a pinch hitter. As a pinch runner, I should say. So the first 2 black men to play in the World Series are Jackie Robinson and Dan Bankhead in 1947. It's a 7-game series. It's DiMaggio and Berra. It's Yogi Berra's first World Series. It's the first World Series, obviously, for Jackie Robinson and Gil Hodges and some of these guys. The Dodgers are not quite yet the boys of summer yet. Campanella's not on the team yet. Robinson is really the only guy other than Pee Wee Reese who'd been with the team since the early 40s. Some of the people you'd think about later, Duke Snider and Gil Hodges, they're on the team. Although actually, I don't know if Snider even gets into the World Series in 47. I'd have to look that up real quick. So it's not the famous boys of summer team of Hodges, Reese, Robinson, Snider, Furillo, Campy. It's not exactly that team, but Gil Hodges appears in 1 game in the World Series in 47. Snyder's not there yet. In fact, I don't know if Snyder even makes it to the majors, even for a cup of coffee in 47. I'd have to look up exactly when his rookie year was.
I'll look that up.
By 49, it's really the full team of the boys of summer Dodgers. Hodges, Campanella, Carl Furillo, Robinson and Reese still there. Obviously, all those guys have full-time starting jobs with the Dodgers by the time they make it to the World Series 2 years later to play the Yankees yet again in the 49 World Series. Robinson and Reese are there in 47, but you still have a lot of other guys who wouldn't be around even a couple years later. Eddie Stanky and Pete Reeser and Dixie Walker. So it's a little bit of a transitional year for a number of reasons for the Dodgers in 47. And the Yankees are kind of in a transition that year too. Joe McCarthy had been the manager of the team starting in, I think, 31 was McCarthy's year. He kind of had taken over a couple years after Miller Huggins passed away and taken over this team of Ruth and Gehrig and Lazzeri and led them to the World Series in 32. That was the famed Ruth called shot year. Ruth retires. DiMaggio joins the team. Yankees win 4 World Series in a row, 36, 37, 38, 39. Gehrig obviously has to retire because he's ill, fatally so. And then the Yankees continue to roll through the 40s. 41, they win the World Series over the Dodgers, like we mentioned. That's the DiMaggio 56-game streak year. 42, they make it and lose. 43, with a very different team, they make it to the World Series and beat St. Louis. And this is a team that doesn't have DiMaggio on it, doesn't have some of the other, doesn't have Rizzuto on it, doesn't have some of these guys. They're all serving in a war. And McCarthy wins with guys like Nick Etten and Tuck Steinbach leading the team over the Cardinals in 43. McCarthy manages the team throughout the war. And then in 46, he sort of burns out on the job. He's drinking more than he ever has. And he eventually just in the middle of a season, in the middle of a road trip, he just burns out. And
I got to be honest, I did not, until I did my research for this episode, I did not know that he resigned. He just left and resigned. I had always just assumed he, in traditional Yankee fashion, sort of like they did with, Joe Torre and Casey Stengel, they just kind of were like, well, you won a bunch, but it's been a while, so you're gone now. I didn't realize that he just resigned. They were concerned about his drinking and all of that. I figured he was just fired.
He had a confrontation with a relief pitcher by the name of Joe Page, who was somebody we'll talk about a little further on in this episode. And yeah, he had basically went home to Buffalo and phoned in his resignation, and that was the end of him. Couple different guys, sort of journeyman types, players. I believe who managed the Yankees the remainder of the 46 season. For some reason, I have the name Johnny Noon in my head, and I think actually Bill Dickey might have even managed them.
I have that. Let me pull it up here. I thought I had it.
They were managed for 35 games by McCarthy, who at 35 games, he was 22-13. That's not a bad record. And then Bill Dickey, the retiring catcher, was 57-48. Again, not a bad record. And then Johnny Noon, who I don't know anything about. He was probably a lifetime coach. Coached the last 14 games of the season, went 8-6. Not a bad record, only 87-67, but not great by Yankee standards. And so they decide that they need a new manager, and they call on a gentleman by the name of Bucky Harris, who had been a player manager with the Washington Senators in the 1920s. His first year as a manager was at the age of, he was 27 years of age in 1924, won the World Series for the Washington Senators, the first and only World Series ever won by the Washington Senators franchise. Walter Johnson, the aging veteran, gets a World Series finally. The only World Series won by a DC team until 2019, almost 100 years later, when the Nationals win it all. And he manages the Senators for a few more years. Then he's in Detroit. He actually leaves Detroit just before they start winning World Championships and going to World Series in the mid-30s. He's in Boston for a year. Then he's back with the Senators. He's in Philly with the Philadelphia Phillies for a year. And then finally, in 1947, he is hired to manage the vaunted New York Yankees, and he's their manager going into the 47 World Series. Into the 47th season, I should say.
Yeah, and it's kind of by the way, I went back. Snyder played in like 40 games in 47, and then 53 games in 48, and then had a full season in 49, starting with the Dodgers. It's interesting when you look back on it in hindsight because, from a Yankee standpoint, there's sort of four different pillars. There's the Huggins era. Huggins dies towards the end of the 29th season. Bob Shalke coaches in 30. McCarthy takes over. We just talked about McCarthy's era from 31 to 46. He wins, I believe, 7 championships. Then there's this couple of year gap, which we're talking about now. Then there's the Casey Stengel era till 1960. And then later there's Torrey. Then there's some other guys who pick up title. Ralph Houck has 2 championships, Billy Martin, Bob Lemon, Joe Girardi, but you kind of think of the 4 sort of big eras, and the first 3 of them, with the exception of a couple of years, are almost uninterrupted. There's just like a year or 2 buffer between Huggins and McCarthy, and then between McCarthy and Stengel. But in the middle, you have this Bucky Harris team who they win the World Series in 1947. I think a lot of people who aren't specifically, Yankee baseball experts, but still like are baseball historians, if you gave them 2 guesses as who the manager of that team was, and again, obviously not like real historians, but people who were like baseball history fans, they would first guess McCarthy and then they would guess Stengel. They wouldn't realize, oh yeah, there was somebody in between that.
And somebody who's a Hall of Fame manager for that matter.
That's true too, yeah.
The other thing that's worth noting about Harris is that he grew up in a very sort of working class, poor background, but he's married to a woman who is from DC. She'd grown up in a mansion in DC, and she's sort of a society type woman. And so much so that when they got married in the 20s, I guess it would have been the early 20s in DC, the President Coolidge and his wife attended their wedding. So she was somebody who had kind of run in very different rich circles, and he was very much not that. And as 1947 is beginning, he is going through a divorce throughout the 47 season. And there's an interesting story there that I should mention. And I just want to make sure that it's a divorce and not a death, because I don't want to attribute the wrong thing here. So hold on one second here.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, let's just kind of, set the stage. You talked about we're just a couple years off the war. We had that 41 World Series between the Yankees and the Dodgers. The Dodgers, obviously, at that point are still all white. There's a couple of guys who would be later associated with the late 40s teams, but it's almost on an island there. It's the last year of it's the last normal year for a while. As the war years go on, they get progressively weirder. In 42, 43, 44, 45 is still mostly a war year. And as we're coming out of it, 46 is the year that the Red Sox and the Cardinals get to the World Series. So the Yankees, it's now been 3 years since the Yankees have been to a World Series, or I guess three straight pennants that they didn't get.
Yep.
They didn't win the pennant in 44, 45, or 46, which is the longest stretch they'd had since 32 to 36.
Correct.
At that point.
Mm-hmm. I was right. His first marriage did end in a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
The Yankees are, for the first time, maybe the previous year, rather, a little bit, but the Yankees have returned, especially on offense. This is a return of the pre-war Yankees. DiMaggio in center field at 32, Tommy Henrich 34, Rizzuto at 29 at shortstop, Charlie Keller, who misses much of the season with injury. Lots of guys in their 30s, a couple in their early 20s. The only young guy on the team really is Yogi Berra, who had come up a little bit the year before and played some games. 47 is his first full season, but Berra is going back and forth between catcher and the outfield because his defense is suspect. His arm is very suspect. Harris doesn't have a lot of confidence in Berra as a catcher. In fact, it's not until a couple years when Stengel comes on and decides he is going to make Yogi Berra a catcher that Berra comes into his own as a catcher. So Berra is the one young guy on this 47 team that is a regular everyday player, and his future with the team, his future as a catcher is very much in doubt. And then the pitching staff is really kind of a bunch of journeymen. You have Allie Reynolds, who would be on the team throughout the late 40s and early 50s. He'd be one of the famed big three of Rashi, Lopat, and Reynolds that would win the 5 World Series in a row, late 40s, early 50s. But then you got Spec Shea and Spud Chandler, who's 39, and a journeyman by the name of Bobo Newsom, who always refers to himself in the third person. He calls himself Bobo. Bobo Newsom in his career manages to play on, let's count them, the Dodgers, the Cubs, the Browns, the Senators, the Red Sox, the Tigers, the Dodgers. I said the Dodgers already, so that's 6. The Athletics is 7, and the Yankees is 8, and the Giants is 9. So he plays on more than half the teams in Major League Baseball during his time as a major league pitcher. If you look at his baseball reference page, you know how on the baseball reference they have all the numbers that the guy wore. His is like 5 columns long. It's crazy. And so this is the team. This is sort of in between the Red Ruffing Lefty Gomez years of the Yankees, but before the Reynolds, Rashi, Lopat, later Whitey Ford, and guys like that. So a very in between team for the Yankees. It's kind of, there's a book I think it's called Bridging Two Dynasties that talks about this team. It kind of is in some ways the end of the McCarthy years, but then in a lot of other ways it's sort of the beginning of the Stengel years. So that's the Yankees. The Dodgers, obviously, this is a Dodger team that's gotten a lot of attention throughout the years.
Yeah.
We talked in a recent episode about Larry McPhail, who was an owner of the Dodgers, and then by 47 is an owner of the Yankees, and we'll talk about him. So the Dodger team, Larry McPhail had been an owner of the Dodgers. He was sort of forced out by his fellow owners. They bring in Branch Rickey. McPhail's now one of the ownership group of the Yankees. We'll talk about McPhail at the very end of this episode. Branch Rickey, in addition to all of his activities in building a team, and when he's not busy trying to screw Charlie Connerly out of a contract in the AAFC, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, he makes the move to bring Jackie Robinson to organized white baseball, first to the Montreal Royals in 46, which is the Dodgers' top farm team, and then to the Brooklyn Dodgers in 47. Now is probably not the time to go down the rabbit hole of all of the obstacles faced by Robinson in his rookie year, and really, frankly, throughout his career, but we're particularly talking about 47, and a lot of this is stuff that has been sort of shrouded in, I don't know, I guess you'd call it mystery as to what exactly the specific nature of the resistance to Robinson was.
You're talking about within the Dodgers clubhouse?
Yeah, within the Dodgers. I mean, there's people that I guess the fact that there was some sort of a petition is pretty, that's pretty well established, led by Dixie Walker, who is perhaps the most beloved Dodger all-star outfielder, older guy at 36 himself. It was Dixie Walker. It was Bobby Bragan, who was the third string catcher, and off the top of my head, I don't remember who the third guy was who was. Let me
see if I can find it. So this happens in spring training of 47. This had been Robinson signs in December of 45, something like that. 46, they sent him up to Montreal to play for the Dodgers' top farm team. He has a great year. I believe the Montreal Royals win the pennant or whatever the championship is there. 47, he's in camp a lot with Montreal, but they all are training down in Florida, playing really well in exhibitions against the Dodgers, and they kind of make the decision, all right, it's time to bring this guy over, or at least it's clear that that's going to happen sooner rather than later. The Dodgers, who, like a lot of teams at the time, had a lot of Southerners. Truthfully, a lot of the American baseball players now are Southerners or from California. The warmer weather is the breeding ground for baseball in the United States. I guess everywhere, but specifically I'm talking about the US now. Had a lot of Southerners. Certainly not all of them had the same degree. I think a guy like Dixie Walker, it's pretty clear it was out and out racism. That was why he didn't want Robinson on the team and didn't want, a lot of these guys were not just, they didn't want a black guy on their team. They didn't want to shower with him. They didn't want to ride the bus with him. They also didn't want their friends that back down south to be critical of how could you play with a guy like that sort of thing. I think a few other guys, and none of this is excusable, so don't think I'm trying to couch it. There was probably, within a bunch of other guys, there was a combination of, yes, good old-fashioned racism. Also, well, we got a good team. This is going to become a sideshow. We don't need him. Two, he's going to take somebody's spot. Also, every game is going to become a circus now. Like,
worried about the perception of them in their hometowns. And, some of them said I had businesses. Yeah, there's, you're not excusing any of it by noting that there are gradations of it. And I think it's also worth noting, and again, this doesn't excuse it, but Dixie Walker showed great remorse throughout his life. He lived a very long time. He lived, I think, well into the 90s. And he always, expressed remorse for the fact that he called it the dumbest thing he ever did and apologized for it. And
let's also point out, and again, I'm not defending it. I mean, I guess I can't go this route really because he was older than I thought he was going to be. But, Dixie Walker is 37 years old. He was born in 1910 in Georgia. Probably knew people, probably had older people around, maybe a grandparent or certainly people of that generation who fought in the Civil War. I don't know that the point I'm trying to make is I don't think Dixie Walker was. I think every team probably had several Dixie Walkers throughout their organization. The Yankees, as we'll talk about, very famously were one of the last teams to integrate. And they had several guys on their team who probably would have reacted the same as Dixie Walker or worse. So he was certainly didn't acquit himself very well and is a guy that people remember as a historical figure in that story of 1947. He's sort of the one they talk about, him and then Ben Chapman in Philadelphia. But there was probably a lot more guys in Major League Baseball who shared Dixie Walker's sentiments in March of 1947 than there were who felt otherwise.
And he's sent from Central Casting to be the villain in the story. Southern guy, his name is Dixie. He starts the petition. It's perfect if you want to sort of tell the story. A couple more notes. First of all, Robinson is a second baseman. That's what he had played in the Negro Leagues. That's what he played in his one minor league season with the Montreal Royals. Dodgers have a very good second baseman. They have Eddie Stanky, who I believe is himself. Yeah, he's a a Southern-born guy. He's actually no, he's not. He's from Philly, but he died in Alabama. So I don't know whether maybe he grew up in Alabama, but he was born in Philly. No, he went to high school in Philly. So anyway, not a Southerner, but ends up living in the South later in his career. They have a very good second baseman in Eddie Stanky, a guy who'd been a solid player for them for the last few years. Broke in with the Cubs, ends up later being a star with the Giants and also with the Braves. Eddie Stanky goes to the World Series. This is crazy to think about with Eddie Stanky. Goes to the World Series with the Dodgers in 47, the Braves in 48, and then the Giants in 51. And he can't stay on a team for long, but he makes the World Series with half the National League teams in the 40s and early 50s. So they move Robinson to first base for the 47 season, which is not his natural position, but he goes there. I believe he plays in every game at first base for the Dodgers in 47. Let's take a look here. Robinson plays in 151 games, and the Dodgers play 155, it looks like. So all but 4 games, Jackie Robinson, and I assume he starts in most, almost all of those. So he wins Rookie of the Year. He leads the league in stolen bases. He leads the league in sacrifices, bats .297. His better years were in front of him, but wins the very first Rookie of the Year award issued by the Sporting News. So it is the spark of Robinson on a team that was already a very good team. They had won 96 games the year before and lost the pennant to the St. Louis Cardinals, and the St. Louis had won. This was St. Louis's fourth pennant in a row in 46. So Robinson sort of provides that spark to get the team over the hump. Dixie Walker, despite being 36, hits 306, second on the team in batting. The pitching is led by a young 21-year-old ace who wins a game for every year that he had been alive in the 1947 season. The only time this gentleman ever wins 20 games. Do you know who I'm talking about?
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
Ralph Branca.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're right.
This is Ralph Branca, the future father-in-law of Hello Old Sports guest Bobby Valentine, who is, of course, much later known as being the one who gives up the famed home run to Bobby Thompson in the 51 National League playoff game. He is the ace of the Dodgers as a rookie in the 47 season. I guess he's not technically a rookie. He played, he'd been on the team a couple years, sort of kind of on and off starter reliever, but 47 is his first year as a full-time starting pitcher. He starts 36 games for the Dodgers, goes 21-12. Branca's a New York guy, born in Westchester in Mount Vernon, New York. And so he's a New Yorker through and through. And the Dodgers finish in first place, and they go into the World Series with the Yankees. I guess the only other thing maybe we want to mention is the fact that they do not have their longtime manager with them.
Yeah,
in the 1947 season.
I was gonna say we got to talk about that. We should mention that the movie 47 covers this, and I don't think they're fully honest about why DeRocher is suspended for the entire year. I think the movie makes it seem like it's just because he married a woman, his relationship with Lorraine Day, and that there was some controversy with the Catholic, that maybe might have been CYO, but some sort of Catholic youth organization that, well, it was, the woman was, I don't know if Lorraine Day was officially divorced yet when him and DeRocher when her and DeRocher started checking up, and maybe they got married before a divorce was finalized and all that stuff. And certainly there was that sort of backlash, but, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't the real crux of it that he had really been associated with some known gamblers and was considerably in debt to gamblers?
Yes, that is essentially it. He was repeatedly consorting with gamblers in a way that was not healthy for baseball.
Yeah, if he was going out with gamblers and his married girlfriend, I think the problem was more the gamblers than the married girlfriend.
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And so they suspend DeRocher for a year, and they bring in a guy who'd been a major leaguer in the 19-teens and had sort of been bouncing around coaching and managing throughout baseball, a guy by the name of Bert Schotten, who is known as kindly old Bert Schotten. He's an older guy.
61 at the time, right? Something
61,
like that?
Yeah, I think about in his early 60s. Manages the game in a shirt and tie, coat and tie. So he's one of these guys, kind of like a Connie Mack, who never goes on the field. And I think Robinson always credits Schotten with being a calming force and somebody who was supportive of his integrating the team, integrating the major leagues. Ironically, when DeRocher comes back in 48, one of the issues is that he and Robinson hate each other. And Robinson, despite the fact that when this petition was circulating, DeRocher was one of the guys who came to Robinson's defense. And then they ended up, when DeRocher ends up on the Giants years later, he and Robinson end up just mercilessly taunting each other. Not to be fair, it was not a racial thing with DeRocher. A slur might have made its way in there, but it was much more colorful than that.
DeRocher's probably the first guy in baseball who legitimately hated Jackie Robinson for reasons other than race.
And I think he might have hated DeRocher because Robinson hated him. So
yeah. So just on Schotten real quick, he'd managed a little. He was with the Reds in 1934. His last big league managing before 1947 was for a year with the Reds in 1934. Actually, for one game, he was the manager. He'd spent a lot of the previous time in the Cardinals managing their top farm team in Rochester. And then he was with he was a coach on the Indians staff from 42 to 45. And then he had just left, became a scout in 1946 for the Dodgers. So, it's not like he is a guy who had a long managerial career, long career in baseball, but not as a major league manager. And, you think about the way you described it. Okay, yeah, it could be a boon that you have sort of a kindly old guy in this situation. But that could also, if you think about it, that could have gone the other way if it was a guy who didn't have an overbearing presence. On the surface, you might think a guy like DeRocher would have been better to handle that because he's got a big personality. He could sort of come in and kick ass and line people up and make sure there was no dissension in the locker room. Whereas, you might think, oh, an older guy without a real outgoing, sort of dominant personality, he might not be able to quell some of these problems that the team would have. But it seems like it worked the opposite way, where he was a sort of a calming presence, and the other guys on the team would have had to at least respect him because of his, his age and his sort of demeanor and things like that.
I think that's exactly right. So we won't recap the season, but these are the two pennant winners. There had been a few Subway Series, although they weren't called that at the time. Yankees had played the Giants in 21, 22, and 23. They played them again in 36 and 37, and they would play them again in 51 for the last Giant Yankee Subway Series. This was the second Yankee-Dodger Subway Series, and there would be another, 5 more in the late 40s, early 50s, 49, 52, 53, 55, 56. So this is the second.
And throw in 51 as another Subway Series with two different teams.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and 51's a crazy year in baseball. We'll do an episode on that one time. There are a significant number of luminaries at the opening game on September 30th, 1947 at Yankee Stadium. These include former President Herbert Hoover, New York Governor Thomas E. Dewey, and soon to be a second-time presidential candidate in 1948 when he loses to Harry Truman.
I read a newspaper that I think you've got that backwards.
Secretary of State George C. Marshall, author of the famed Marshall Plan. New York City Mayor William O'Dwyer, who threw out the ceremonial first pitch. The governors of Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania were all at the game. Commissioner Happy Chandler is there, of course, as well as Babe Ruth, Tris Speaker, Ty Cobb, Bill Terry, Rogers Hornsby, Ralph Kiner. Some of these are still.
Rogers Hornsby could not have been happy
because of the integration.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, though, because he's another one of those guys who he coached in Major League Baseball well into the 1960s. He coached with the expansion Mets, and he was known to have a good relationship with all of the black players. So, I think he might have had some issues earlier in his career, but by that point, a lot of these guys had mellowed. And I do think that's an important part of the story. Guys like Hornsby,
I shouldn't have made it glib. You're right. That was a kind of a glib remark. And you're right. We can, one day we will do an episode on Ty Cobb that talks specifically about how, while certainly you can make the case that he was not the most progressive guy, it was not the sort of cartoon villain that he's made out to be. But not to cut you off, but I also wanted to mention with Ruth. Ruth was in the final year of his life at this point. He'd had Babe Ruth Day, I believe, on July 5th. So there's sort of two late Babe Ruth appearances that I always get. There's the one where he's wearing the like suit and the overcoat, and then there's the one with the jersey. I think the one with the jersey was actually later in 1948, right?
The one with the jersey was 48, yeah. And come March, there will be a new book put out by the Society for American Baseball Research about the history of the old Yankee Stadium. And one of the articles will be about all of Babe Ruth's post-career appearances at Yankee Stadium, including these couple of Babe Ruth days. And the author, gentleman by the name of Daniel G. Newman, is very excited about his article that he's contributed to that.
All right, we'll talk about that. But that's the one where he says, like, my voice might sound bad, but it feels just as bad, or something like that. Yeah,
exactly.
Worse, yeah.
So Ruth gets a huge ovation. There's a story that is kind of interesting here, and it's not really related to anything, but it's in one of the books that I read, or that I used to prepare for this. Apparently, Bert, and this is about Ty Cobb, but it's got nothing to do with the Jackie Robinson piece of it. Bucky Harris is going through this divorce, and I guess he and Cobb, Cobb and a lot of guys in his playing days, hadn't gotten along that great. And Bucky Harris sees Ty Cobb before game one, and Cobb comes up to him and he says, "Hey, I know that it's probably tough for you with what you're going through with the divorce right now. And I just wanted to let you know that if you ever needed to get a night out, I would be more than glad to babysit your children." It's just like, can you imagine Ty Cobb babysitting children? It's one of those things that just doesn't match, It's like,
yeah.
I mean, you can picture Babe Ruth, you can picture even like a Mickey Mantle or somebody, or Willie Mays, but like Ty Cobb, not just doing it, but like offering, like, babysit somebody's children. I just got a kick out of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It's one of those things, like, you don't picture certain things about certain people, and Ty Cobb as a babysitter is one of those things. So
yeah, you're right. You're right about that.
So I don't want to do this for every game, but I just want to give you an idea of the first game, just kind of give you an idea what the lineups are. It's at Yankee Stadium. Dodgers have Eddie Stanky leading off and playing second base, Jackie Robinson at first, Pete Reeser is playing center field, Dixie Walker's cleanup, he's playing right field, Gene Hermansky in left, Bruce Edwards is the catcher, he's batting sixth. You got Spider Jorgensen at third base. The Hall of Famer Pee Wee Reese is playing shortstop, and he's hitting eighth. And then the starting pitcher in the first game for the Dodgers is Ralph Branca. For the Yankees, it's Snuffy Sternweiss, the second baseman, leading off. Tommy Henrich in right field. Yogi Berra is batting third and playing catcher, although he was known as Larry Berra at this point. He hadn't widely been given the Yogi nickname quite yet. DiMaggio's in center, batting fourth. George McQuinn, who was a journeyman first baseman, had been an all-star in the early part of his career with the St. Louis Browns, but was finishing out his career in his late 30s with the Yankees. He's the first baseman, and he is batting fifth. And then you got Billy Johnson at third base, Johnny Lindell in left field, batting seventh. Another Hall of Fame shortstop batting eighth is Phil Rizzuto, and then a gentleman by the name of Spec Shea, whose first name was Francis Joseph Shea, but he was known as Spec. And I don't see any glasses on him in his baseball reference picture, so I don't know why he would have been called Spec. Usually any guy but he was called Spec or Specs was a glasses wearer in one way, shape, or form. But he's the starting pitcher, and that is game one of the 47 World Series.
Spec Shea, by the way, also from Naugatuck, Connecticut. He was also known as the Naugatuck Nugget because of that.
They didn't try.
He was nicknamed Spec because of his freckles.
Oh, well, I guess that makes sense.
Very interesting, because I guess you'd be Specs if you were somebody. If it was glasses, it's usually Specs.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Sorry.
One of the storylines going into this. First of all, I think we should also note that this is the first World Series that's broadcast on television. It's not nationwide. It's just in a few cities on the Eastern Seaboard. And it's also done by two legendary broadcasters. What they did in those days and what they would do for another 20 years to come is that the two teams in the World Series would each contribute a broadcaster for both the radio and the television broadcasts of the World Series. And in 47, you got Red Barber for the Dodgers. You got Mel Allen for the Yankees. So it's two classic Hall of Fame broadcasters who would later work together on the Yankee broadcast in the 50s, doing the games for the first televised games in World Series history. So
they're kind of all over the place. Games 1 and 5 are on NBC. Games 3 and 4 are on CBS. And then the Dumont Network has games 2, 6, and 7.
we talked a little bit when we did the Fox episode, which I don't know, that might actually not air until after this one, not post until after this one. But when we did our Fox episode, we talked a little bit about some of the old networks that did sports in the 50s, and Dumont was comment among a lot of them. Kind of a digression in that Dumont was both a TV company and a TV broadcaster. They both manufactured TVs and ran a network. And you didn't see that again for another 70 or 80 years. And you kind of see it again now where Roku has a TV and Apple has a TV. So
it feels like it would be some real early thing where in order to see shows on the Dumont network, you needed a Dumont TV.
Yeah, no, it probably would be that type of thing.
I don't know how it is now, but go ahead.
Exactly. And you're right. Everything old is new again sometimes when it comes to media and TV and all that type of stuff. So the Yankees win game 1 by a score of 5-3. They score 5 runs in the 5th inning. It's their only scoring of the game, but they get 5 runs. Let me see kind of just a quick summary of Johnny Lindell has a 2 RBI double. Bobby Brown, who we talked about last year, because he just passed away, I believe in 20 or 21. I forget which year it was. Scores as a pinch hitter, scores on a walk. Tommy Henrich knocks in a couple of runs. Jackie Robinson begins to terrorize Yogi Berra on the base paths. They'd sort of been going back and forth in the press. In the first inning, Robinson gets on base and immediately steals second base. Berra and Robinson had played against each other the year before when Robinson was with the Montreal Royals and Berra was with the Newark Bears, which was the Yankees' top farm team. And Berra said something along the lines of, he never stole a base on me when I was in Newark, and I don't think he's going to now. And Robinson had retorted, if I was as good as he was, I'd keep my mouth shut about it, that type of thing. Robinson also manages to get Spec Shea to balk for the only time in the entire 1947 season. So Robinson in this historic appearance is making his presence known immediately.
After he steals second base, he's then thrown out at third base on a fielder's choice. So
fair point.
Obviously, he was being aggressive because there was no force there. He wouldn't have had to go, but they threw him out. They threw him out right after that. So just figured that was worth bringing up. So,
yeah. So, but the theme of Robinson embarrassing Berra is a theme that I think carries throughout the series, and the Yankees win game 1.
Yep. So then they go to game 2 the next day at Yankee Stadium again. Again, these are all afternoon games. It's 1947. And this one does not carry with it the same level of drama, although it's not a blowout from the jump. The Yankees end up winning 10-3, but it's, they score 2 in the 5th, 1 in the 4th, or 1 in the 6th, and then 4 in the 7th to blow it open. Up until that point, it's, a pretty close game. Vic Lombardi starts for the Dodgers. Allie Reynolds goes for the Yankees, and the Yankees take a 2-0 lead in the series. Do you have any interesting factoid you want to get to about game 2 here?
So Robinson does not steal off of Berra in this game, but Pee Wee Reese does get a steal off of Berra. That's Reese's second steal. Berra, everybody is sort of widely noticing that Berra is not doing well behind the plate. In fact, no less a baseball authority than Connie Mack calls Berra's performance, quote, the worst World Series catching I ever saw. And Connie Mack had been around since 1903, so he probably would have seen most of the World Series catching. So,
and I mean, to be fair, it gets lucky that the catcher for the 1919 White Sox was not in on the fix, or else he might have a different answer, but
he might have been second. I want to just see if there's anything else here about game 2. The Dodgers make a lot of mistakes in the second game en route to this loss. Do you have in front of you, do the Dodgers make any errors in that game, or is it just other kind of mistakes?
In game 2, the Dodgers make 2 errors.
And I think I have a quote here. Bucky Harris says, "They just simply can't be as bad as they looked. They really had a tough day, didn't they? We're certainly in the driver's seat now, but we're taking this series one game at a time. Shotton says, I don't feel good about this. Who would feel good about losing the first 2 games of a World Series? The boys got some bad baseball out of their systems. So wild pitches, all that type of thing. A couple other things I want to note here. The first relief pitcher that the Dodgers bring in is a gentleman by the name of, and I think this was actually in the first game. It's a gentleman by the name of Behrman, Behr.
He does pitch in this game. I don't know if he pitches in game 1 too. Where were you going with it?
He was a journeyman pitcher. He had been on both Brooklyn and Pittsburgh in 1947. He had an ERA of 6.25. Let me look up his stats. I want to make sure I'm getting his exact.
So he did pitch in game 1. He relieved Branca.
He's the first pitcher that out of the Dodger bullpen. His name is Hank Behrman, Behrman.
Mm-hmm.
And his ERA.
Rough game too.
He has a very rough game too. He had joined the Dodgers. He'd been with them in 46. Oh God, look at this! Is crazy. Did he get traded twice between teams in the same season? Yeah. Okay. He got traded by the Dodgers to Pittsburgh on May 3rd, and then 2 months later, the Pittsburgh sent him back to the Dodgers. And this story, I kind of feel bad for this guy, but I'm sure he's sort of long since deceased, so I don't want to feel. Do you know this story?
No, just when you said I'm sure he's long since, I thought you were going to say I'm sure he's long since got over it. I was going to say, yeah, probably when he died in 1971, he probably got over it.
So, and I just read this story today, and I have to admit, I'd never heard of this guy before. I knew nothing about him. You know how in this day and age, and I'm saying this more to the fans, the listeners, than I am to Andrew, because I know Andrew knows, like this day and age, a guy will have a day, right? Like they'll have, it's Derek Jeter Day.
Yeah.
And they get the guy and they honor him, and maybe he gets a plaque or that type of thing. That used to be something a little different, where almost everybody on the team would have a day. And fans sometimes would kick in money to buy this guy stuff. Guys would get a call. I'm sorry?
That's kind of nice. I mean, with salaries these days, that really would be unnecessary, but go ahead.
It wasn't nice for Hank Behrman. And this is from Jonathan Eig, who wrote Opening Day. It's a story of it's mostly about Robinson, but he gets into some other aspects of the 47 season. He says almost every player, even the marginal ones, was honored with a special day in that era. Fans would take up collections and buy cars and radios and watches for their heroes. But on Hank Behrman Day, fans came up with less than $100. They bought him a savings bond, which Behrman dropped to the grass in disgust.
It is kind of funny, and I know this wasn't probably why they did it, but like in the midst of this season of they've introduced a black player for the first time ever, and how are the fans going to react? And then there's just this reliever they're getting on because he stinks. Like they're booing him like people are booing Robinson, but for him it's just because he stinks. It's like, man, I can't get a break with these fans.
That's right. Even the guy they didn't want on the team gets treated better than me. But, and honestly, this 47 Dodgers, there's the Robinson is the main story, but there's just so many stories. So they go back to Ebbets Field up. The Yankees go back to Ebbets Field up 3-0 and
2-0.
Up 2-0. And Harris, like I said, decides that he's got to bench Yogi Berra. And so for the third game, and the pitching matchup for the third game is Bobo Newsom, the guy who played on every team that I mentioned, against sort of another veteran journeyman type named Joe Hatton for the Dodgers. And so they bring in Sherm Lawler, who in and of himself ends up being an all-star catcher for the White Sox in most of the 50s. He's the starting catcher basically on the White Sox for the entire 50s, including on the go-go White Sox that we Did a show.
I knew I recognized that name.
Yeah, did a show on about it. And I think we even talked about him a little bit in this context when we did the Go-Go White Sox episode. We talked about how in 47, it was kind of an almost even money proposition who was going to be the Yankees catcher of the future. And obviously they made the right decision because Yogi Berra is an all-time great, but Sherm Lawler, no slouch himself, and he gets the start for the Yankees in Game 3 of the World Series because Harris is just at a point where he just cannot deal with Berra's terrible defense any longer. And at Ebbets Field, the Dodgers finally get a win 9-8.
Yeah, it's the Dodgers basically they explode off on Bobo Newsom in the second inning. They get up 6-0 in the second inning. Eddie Stanky hits a 2-run double to make it 4-0. Newsom comes out of the game. 2 more runs come in. The Yankees actually score in the next 5 innings. So they score 2 in the third. So it's 7-2. Then they score 2 in the fourth, make it 7-4. But the Dodgers keep scoring. It's 9-4. Gets as close as 9-7. The Dodgers get a lot of they get 2 innings of relief from Ralph Branca, who had pitched in Game 1. They get 2 and 2/3 out of Hugh Casey. The Yankees bullpen's pretty good. Wow, this is a weird game in that almost every pitcher who pitched let up runs until the last 2. But in the end, it's 9-8. I'm trying to see if the Yankees did they threaten at the end of the game or anything like that. No, but Yogi Berra was put in the game, and he hits a home run in the 7th inning to make it 9-8 and cut it to 1 run.
And that home run is very noteworthy for 2 reasons. First of all, it's Yogi Berra's first postseason home run, first World Series home run. He only ever plays in World Series, and I don't know how many he ends up with in his career, but it's a lot. I have his Baseball Reference page up here. How many postseason home runs for Yogi Berra in his career? He hits 12. So it's the first of 12 World Series home runs for Yogi Berra. It's also the first pinch hit home run in World Series history.
Oh,
so
wow.
in almost a half century of the World Series, there'd never been a pinch hit home run until Yogi Berra hits one in Game 3 of the 47 World Series. And this is the longest game to date in World Series history. Do you want to take a guess at how long?
This Game 3, 9-8?
Yeah.
Let's guess. 9-8. TV, but no TV timeouts yet. 3 hours and 5 minutes?
Did you look it up?
Yes.
Okay.
But that's a 2-0 game in this day and age.
Yeah, exactly. So 3 hours and 5 minutes. The Yankees have a chance late in the game on an at-bat by Bobby Brown, who we mentioned, the future medical doctor and president of the American League. He hits a pinch hit double off of the foul screen in right at Ebbets Field, which is a 3 feet wide screen that extends above the top of the wall. If the ball hits this screen, it's in play, and the runner can only, get as far as he can get. The hit that Brown has, it's a double. It's only 2 bases. The rule was later changed at Ebbets Field to make it a home run, and had that hit by Bobby Brown been a home run, the Yankees would have tied the game in, I believe it's the bottom of where is that? Where is this hit? The book I'm reading made it seem like it was later in the game, but this I'm trying to find here.
The thing I have, I can look it up, but it says that Yankees went down in order in the 9th, so it definitely wasn't in the 9th.
When was this hit? Am I looking at the wrong game, first of all? All right, and I'm reading a book by Red Barber, and he was there, so you'd think that his writing would be accurate here. Hold on.
You said Bobby Brown?
Yeah.
All right, I'm looking here. Waller, Clark, Steinweiss.
Okay, interesting. Oh, so it's in the top of the sixth. He comes up at the beginning of the inning and doubles, but I guess you can't really. That's kind of a dumb point by Red Barber because he scored anyway.
Yeah, it was a double, then a ground out, then he scored on a double from Heinrich, and then pop up, walk, pop, fly. So the Yankees got a bunch of runners in the inning.
But he would.
They stranded the bases loaded, but yeah, that's a little.
That
thin.
Play wouldn't have made Red Barber.
Bad job out of Red Barber.
Bad job out of you in that spot. So 9-8, Dodgers win, go into their first game, and now we go into game 4, which is one of the most interesting games in World Series history.
So it's Friday, October 3rd, 1947. We should also point out no off days. No shifting between cities. So they play 7 games in 7 days in this World Series, and this is the 4th straight day. We're still at Ebbets Field. Like we said, the Dodgers, so far the home teams won every game in the series. Yankees up 2-1. Starting pitching matchup in game 4 is Bill Bevins going for the Yankees against Harry Taylor for the Brooklyn Dodgers, who does not pitch for very long.
No, he does not. And the Yankees jump out to a lead in this game. Not a very impressive lead, but they score a run in the first inning. They score a run in the 4th inning. DiMaggio walks with the bases loaded to score Snuffy Sternweiss. And then in the 4th inning, Johnny Lindell doubles home Billy Johnson, who tripled to open the inning off of Taylor. And because Taylor's still in the game, I'd imagine in the 5th inning. No, he doesn't pitch. Oh, no, they take him out early. Why do they take him out so early?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out. I mean, it's not like they let him get much time. He only he let him 2 hits and a walk. He pitched to 3 batters from what I can tell.
Let me see what I can find on that.
All right.
Leading off for the Yankees, Sternweiss drilled Taylor's first pitch for a single to left. Henrik singles. Yogi Berra hits a ball to shortstop, which is a Taylor-made double play. Pee Wee Reese commits a throwing error, so they get no outs. Bases are loaded, and then DiMaggio walks in a run. So he pitches to 4 batters, this guy, and had Pee Wee Reese not made an error at shortstop. So that's you think guys have a quick hook now? That is an incredibly quick hook for Taylor.
And I remember reading about that in like 1930. I remember like the 1912 World Series. McGraw did that a few times. Like, we talk about now, like guys take pitchers out in the 4th inning if they start to struggle, especially in playoff games. That's one thing. You don't usually see it after 3 batters, but I guess guys back then, 1912 and 1947 are not the same era, but like they just go like, hey, he doesn't have it, we're getting him.
Yeah, they would maybe go more on feel than on anything else.
You wouldn't do that if you had a top of the line pitcher or an all-star or whatever, but anybody else, you'd kind of go like, I don't like the way he's looking. I don't like his body language out there. We're going to get him. So I don't want to spoil it, but weird when you look at a starting pitcher who did not get anybody out on one side and then what the other starting pitcher's line was and which team won the game.
So Yankees score a run in the 1st. They score a run in the 4th. They're up 2-0. In the bottom of the 5th, Brooklyn gets a run back with a walk, a bunt ground out fielder's choice with the runner out at first. Pee Wee Reese then bats home a run on another fielder's choice, and then there's a stolen base and a strikeout to get them out of the inning. By the 9th inning, the Dodgers have managed to be down only 2-1, I should say. They do not have a single hit. Bevins, going into the 9th inning, has walked. How many guys has Bevins walked going into the 9th inning? He has 10 total in the game, but 2 of those are in the bottom of the ninth. So he's walked 8 batters. He's given up a run. The Yankees have committed an error. So he goes into the ninth inning with a no-hitter. And keep in mind, this is 9 years before Don Larson. So he is poised to pitch the first no-hitter in World Series history, which in those days would have made it also the first World Series in baseball postseason history. But he's still got a very good chance at losing the whole game. The TV broadcast is being done by Mel Allen and Red Barber. Mel Allen had done the first half of the game. Red Barber's doing the second. And going into this ninth inning, go ahead, Ange.
As you say, we should also point out in the top of the ninth, the Yankees ended up with the bases loaded and 1 out. And Tommy Heinrich grounds into a double play that ends the inning and keeps the game at 2-1. So the Yankees had a chance to blow it open there, and they couldn't get anything across.
Barber does not believe in the superstition that you don't mention a no-hitter. He said that Mel was a devout practitioner of the whole thing. He'd say things like, don't go away, something big has happened. And he wouldn't even say, when he gave the totals, he wouldn't even say like the Dodgers have 1 run on no hits and so many errors. He would actually stop. He'd say the Dodgers have 1 run and no errors, that type of thing.
Geez.
He wouldn't even mention it, but Red Barber views himself very much as a reporter, so he continues to give. He says when he starts doing the game in the 5th inning, he says, I gave the 5-inning totals. The Yankees 2 runs, 6 hits, and 1 error. The Dodgers 1 run, no hits, and 2 errors. Mel, sitting by me, started making choking sounds like he was trying to swallow chinaberry seeds. I don't know what chinaberry seeds are, but they must not be too easy to.
Probably something that's got a less insensitive name in the modern era. I'll look what they're called. Go ahead.
And by this point, Bevins has walked more players in a game, in a World Series game, than any pitcher since 1910. So he is, even for the 40s, he is walking a heck of a lot of guys.
Chinaberry seeds appear to be like a big kind of seed.
Well, I hadn't gotten that from what he said, so thanks for clearing that up.
But okay, you want me to give you the exact definition of what they are, as if that's going to mean anything to you?
Sure.
All parts of the plant, especially the fruit, well, they're also poisonous. So that would also be a problem. I think that would be. It says it's from the Texas Invasive Species Institute, that they're all poison. Oh, yes. So I think the bigger problem would be the poison and less the size.
So they go into the bottom of the ninth, Yankees up 2-1. And if you find it online, I remember seeing it on we had a video growing up of the history of the Yankees. It was a VHS tape, but it only went through 1987. But it was sort of one of the first of those documentaries. You remember what I'm talking about, right?
I thought we used to rent it from the library. I didn't think we had it.
Oh, you're right. We used to rent it from the library, and I have it now. I bought it off eBay a couple of years ago.
Also, as of 1987, it was fair to wonder if there was going to be any more history for the Yankees. So,
well, it was also kind of weird watching that tape in 1998, and it's like this kind of stops before a lot of important things happen. But anyway, there's this clip of Bevins like doing a voiceover. Like afterwards, they must have gone to him and been like, talk us through this ninth inning. So the catcher, Bruce Edwards, flies out. So that's 1 out. And then Carl Furillo walks. Spider Jorgensen pops out to first base. So now they've got 1 out, 2 outs with a runner on first and the pitcher's slot coming up. Oh, and they send in Al Gianfrido, and that's a name you're going to hear again in a minute. They send in Al Gianfrido to pinch run. He's a speedster. They send him in to pinch run for Furillo at first base, and he immediately steals second base during the next batter. So the pitcher, the relief pitcher, Hugh Casey, is coming up, and Schotten needs a pinch hitter. he looks on his bench, and I want to give you an idea of who he's got on the bench here, because he looks at the bench and sees it as something that's pretty thin. He looks at he sees the backup catcher, who's a guy by the name of Gil Hodges, who a couple years later that would have been a no-brainer to put in Gil Hodges. He had sent Gianfrido in to run, and so he's really low on guys. He's got a utility infielder by the name of Eddie Mixis. He's got Cookie Lavagetto, who we'll hear about in a minute, and he's got a guy by the name of Pete Reeser. Now, Pete Reeser had been with the team as a more or less a starting outfielder for much of the season. He played 110 games, 462 at bats, batting average of 309. Pete Reeser had been essentially a rookie. His first full season was in 1941 with the Dodgers, the first year they went to the World Series. He led the league that year in doubles, triples, won a batting title with a 343 batting average, slugging, OPS, also led the league in hit by pitch with 11 hit by pitch, finished second in the MVP voting to his teammate Dolph Camilli. In fact, in 1941, the top 3 MVP finishers were all members of that 41 Dodger team. And there's a book that just came out by him, or about him, I should say, called Baseball's Greatest What If. And I don't remember whether it was in 41 or in 42, but early on in his career, Pete Reeser runs headlong into a brick wall chasing a fly ball, basically knocks himself silly. His career is never the same. He then goes on to serve 3 years in the military, so he misses 43, 44, 45. And by the time he comes back, even though he leads the league in steals in 46 and makes another all-star team, he's not the same player he once was. And by the 1947 is the last time that he'll get more than about 250 plate appearances. It's the last time he'll appear in more than 100 games. And Schotten doesn't think very, very highly of him, partly because he thinks Reeser is sort of, this injury-prone guy, and he also because he suspects that Reeser, as well as Ralph Branca, have been feeding negative quotes to the press about Schotten and his managing. But he looks at what he views are some limited options, and Reeser, who can barely walk, who I think it was the trainer or the doctor had told him he shouldn't even try to play. Schotten thinks that Reeser's his best option, and so they put him in. He pinch hits. Bevins, and like I said, Gianfrido immediately steals second. So now they've got runners up, just a runner on second. So they walk Reeser. They put the tying run on, the go-ahead run on to set up the force play with 2 outs. They immediately stand in another pinch runner for Reeser, Eddie Mixis, and then they pinch hit for their leadoff batter. They pinch hit for Eddie Stanky with a guy by the name of Cookie Lavagetto, and he's a righty. Bevins is a righty, but they've got no lefties left on the bench, so it's got to be a right-handed hitter against the right-handed Bevins, even though, that would normally not be what you would do. And Bevins throws a pitch, and Lavagetto doubles off the wall, and there's this famous quote of this famous, clip of Red Barber saying, "Here comes the tying run, and here comes the winning run." And the Dodgers break up the no-hitter, win the game, all on this last pitch of Game 4 of the 47 World Series.
The last hit of Cookie Lavagetto's career. This is the last series of his career. In addition, it's also the last series of Bevins' career. And it's the last, and when I say series, I mean, this is the last games of their career.
Mm-hmm.
Lavagetto, Bevins, and Gianfrido, all the key players in that half inning. This is the last couple of days of their career, even if they didn't all know it at the time. But we have now, in the second Yankees-Dodgers World Series ever, we have our second straight extremely fluky, memorable Game 4.
Epic Game 4. Yes. Yep. The famous sports writer says Harris violated all 10 commandments of the dugout by ordering Bevins to walk Reeser. He also later writes that same day that he said the saddest person in the world is the sports writer whose typewriter is missing a V and can't type Bevins or Lavagetto. And apparently, as he's walking off the field, the DiMaggio just comes up to Bevins and says, "Tough luck, Bill." And Bevins says, "Well, I guess there wasn't anything left to say other than that." So the Dodgers,
to be honest, that's as sentimental as Joe DiMaggio usually got.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And so all of a sudden, from thinking they were almost dead and about to be not only no hit, but to go down 3-1 in the series, the Dodgers are very much alive. They're tied at 2 going into game 5 at Ebbets Field. And you got the starters, or you got the Yankee starter from game 1, which is Spec Shea, back on the mound. And you got Rex Barney, who's pitching for the Dodgers. Spec Shea pitches an excellent game, wins his second game of the World Series. It's a 2-0. He goes to 2-0 in the series. It is a 2-1 Yankee victory, complete game. DiMaggio hits a home run off of Rex Barney in the 5th inning does that get the Yankees scoring? Sorry, no, they also scored in the 4th. They scored on a 4th. They actually scored on an RBI single by Shea in the 4th inning. And that's, it's a good game. It's not nearly as high scoring as some of the previous games have been, but it's a win for the Yankees at Ebbets Field. And they're going back to Yankee Stadium, like you said, with no off days, up 3-2 in the 1947 World Series.
They get a complete game out of Spec Shea in this game. In the 9th inning, the Dodgers get the leadoff man on. They sacrifice Bunham over to second base. And then Shea gets the next 2 guys out, including the last batter of the game, which is Cookie Lavagetto. Again, Shea gets him to strike out with the tying run at second base, and the Dodgers, who had needed the heroics the day before to tie the series, come up a heroic short in this game, and now are faced with the tall order of, they won 2 out of 3. Yeah, they tied the series. Now they have to go find a way to win a game at Yankee Stadium. The last game at Yankee Stadium, they lost 10-3 just a couple of days earlier.
Shotton is frustrated because earlier in the game, with the Dodgers potentially being able to rally, he had ordered Carl Furillo to bunt, and Furillo had not done so, and so he's angry at his team. We mentioned earlier about some of the other players feeding quotes. So, well, some of the guys are fans of Mr. Shotton. Some of the others certainly are not. So he's starting to maybe lose the locker room just a little bit. And yeah, so then we go to game 6 back in New York. You got Vic Lombardi pitching for the Dodgers, who I don't believe lasts very long. I think 2 2/3, but he gets eventually relieved by Branca, and starting for the Yankees is another guy who doesn't last very long, and that's Allie Reynolds, who himself only goes 2 1/3. And they return to their high-scoring ways, and this is an 8-6 Dodger victory.
Yeah, neither starting pitcher makes it out of the 3rd inning. Lombardi goes 2 2/3, 5 hits, 4 runs. He's now pitching to a 12 ERA in the series, above a 12. Allie Reynolds only goes 2 1/3. He leaves after 6 hits and 4 runs, 3 of them earned. So after a wild first 3 innings, back to a 4-4 game. Both teams are into their bullpen. The Yankees get a run in the bottom of the 4th. But then the Dodgers in the 6th inning explode for 4 more runs. How did the Yankees get that in the 4th? In the bottom of the 4th, the Yankees get a run on a Yogi Berra RBI single. So he's back in the lineup, and he has the RBI single. But then in the 6th, they get a sacrifice fly from Cookie Lavagetto to score a run, then a double from Bobby Bragan scores a run, and then Pee Wee Reese with a two-run single makes it 6-5 to put the Dodgers, or excuse me, makes it, I believe, 8, puts the Dodgers ahead for good. I might have screwed that up. Let me look here. That must have made it 8-5. Yeah, that made it 8-5. I'm sorry. So that makes it 8-5, and that's enough to win it for them. The Yankees managed to get a run in the 9th inning, but they are unable to make it any further. So the Yankees, with a chance to win the World Series, lose the game 8-6.
The most famous play of this game comes in the bottom of the 6th inning, and we talked a little bit earlier about Dan Bankhead, who was the second black player ever to participate in a World Series. He had pinch run in the previous inning, and he comes out, and the Dodgers also make a bunch of other defensive switches, and that includes Cookie Lavagetto going in to play third base, and Eddie Mixis, the utility man, being replaced in left field by Al Gianfrido. And the Yankees got Sternweiss walks, Berra singles, and then DiMaggio comes up against Brooklyn pitcher Joe Hatton and hits a monstrous fly ball to left field that Gianfrido, who, keep in mind, had just entered the game, reaches up and what we would call right in front of the bullpen, what we would call today robbing the home run. And it is famous because there's a clip, and keep in mind that this was the first World Series ever televised. There's a clip of DiMaggio rounding first base, and once he saw that the ball was caught, sort of kicking at the dirt and showing frustration. And it was always said that this was one of, if not the only time, that DiMaggio ever showed any real emotion on the field.
Yeah, wasn't there something where they talked about, like, despite obviously this being the first World Series with black players, like all these big games, all these big moments in this series involved Italians.
Yeah, there's
Gianfrido and DiMaggio and Lavagetto.
One of the black newspapers afterwards said something along the lines of, if we're going to be ethnic about it, we'd have to tip the cap to those of Italian descent. But it's been a great World Series, no matter who, no matter who your parents are, that type of thing. On the Gianfrido catch, it's interesting. I found sort of some conflicting, and maybe they're not conflicting. Maybe they just sort of are different things that DiMaggio said to different people. Off the record, he tells a group of reporters, he says, "Don't write this in the paper, but the truth is, if he'd been playing me right, he would have made it look easy." So he was bitter, and he thought that the only reason that Gianfrido had seemed to make such a wonderful catch was that he was playing out of position in the first place. But then I also found another quote where DiMaggio says it's the best catch that anybody ever made against him. So choose which story you want to believe, but DiMaggio, one way or the other, not happy about the catch that gets made. And so they go into Game 7 of the World Series. And this is sort of a series, no pun intended. There had been a 7-game series in 1946, the year before. So for the second year in a row, you got a really good World Series on your hands. October 6th, only 6 days from from Game 1 and when it had started. You got Hal Gregg on the mound for Brooklyn, and you got Spec Shea on the mound again for the Yankees. And one of the things that Schotten is frustrated about is he feels that Branch Rickey basically did nothing to shore up the pitching staff during the season, despite Schotten's repeated pleas to Rickey that something needed to be done about this pitching staff. Although I guess he shouldn't complain too much because he did bring Hank Berman back. So, I mean, you can't complain. And the only pitcher that he brought in all year was Dan Bankhead. And first of all, Bankhead doesn't pitch in the series. And second of all, that seemed to almost be more about Rickey wanting to have another black player on the team with Robinson. And obviously nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But the only pitching acquisition that Ricky had made all season was for a guy that wasn't really being brought in for his pitching abilities. And you see that because they keep having to throw these guys out there, including in Game 7, these guys who pitched horribly in the series, but they have no choice but to keep putting them out there. Meanwhile, Harris and the Yankees are able to throw Spec Shea out there, and he's already won both of his starts in the series. And what's his ERA for this? His final ERA for the entire his ERA
at the end of the series.
His ERA at the end of the series is 2.35, and he doesn't even win this game. So I'd imagine that his ERA was probably even lower going into this series, going into Game 7. Game 1, he pitches 5 innings, gives up 1 earned run. Game 2, he pitches 9 innings, gives up 1 earned run. Meanwhile, the starting pitcher for the Brooklyn Dodgers is Hal Gregg.
Yeah, he pitched to a 3.55 ERA in the series.
Gregg did.
The two guys who had to pitch after him ended up with ERAs over 7 in the series, and it's not like either of them got rocked in Game 7.
So they were lower going in.
Or higher, depending on how you want to look at it.
Higher going in, I should say. That's exactly right. So the point that we're trying to get across here is that the pitching advantage, Yankees versus Dodgers, is an important point in this series. And this Game 7, it's not a blowout. The final score is 5-2. The Yankees bring Joe Page out of the bullpen in the 4th inning to relieve Shea after Bevins had come in. Page pitches 5 innings, gives up only 1 hit, no runs, no walks, only strikes out 1, so his fielders help him. A lot of people say that if there was an MVP of the 47 World Series, that Joe Page might not have been a bad candidate based solely on his game-winning performance in Game 7. Incidentally, Joe Page, sort of a man who enjoyed the nightlife and enjoyed his liquor. And I think we may even mentioned at the beginning here, a large part of Joe McCarthy's frustrations the year before came from the fact that Page was supposed to be their ace reliever and was out drinking and carousing all the time. Page was DiMaggio's roommate on the road, which is another interesting sort of just little bit of a note about him. But he comes in, he shuts the Dodgers down. His curveball had not been working well for him, so he basically throws only fastballs for 5 innings, but he closes the door. And in this 7-game epic World Series, the Yankees have taken out the Dodgers 5-2, and they win the World Series 4-3.
Yep, the Yankees add a couple of runs throughout. They take the lead in the 4th inning, 3-2. They add a run each in the 7th and 8th to get ahead 5-2. Like you mentioned, Page goes from when he comes in the 5th the rest of the way to close the door. Yankees win the game 5-2. They win the series 4-3. What championship number would this have been for them? 23, 27, 28, 32, 36, 37, 38, 39, 41, 43. So this would have been their 11th championship, I guess. Does that sound right to you?
For the Yankees, so they won 3 in the 20s. They won 5 in the 30s. That's 8, and they'd won 2 earlier in the 40s. Yes, this is their earliest championship.
11th.
What did I say?
Earliest.
No, that would be stupid. I think I was already starting to read from this book. This is.
Do you know what today? You know what? Before you go on, do you know what this also was the only time a certain thing has ever happened for the Yankees?
Only time I don't know. What is it?
The only time they've ever won a Game 7 of the World Series at home.
Really?
Yeah, we'd have to go through how many times they had the opportunity. Probably not a ton. But it says, yep, this was the first and to date only World Series in which the Yankees won Game 7 in their home stadium.
The one that immediately comes to mind, I know they lost 55 to Brooklyn 8 years later.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other one.
26 in St. Louis.
26 would have had to have been in St. Louis because for up until 94, it was even in odd years.
Yeah.
So there's
57 a 7-game series.
57 was a 7-game series, so they would have lost Game 7 to Milwaukee. Yeah.
Right. And 81 was not a 7-game series, was it?
No.
No. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Well,
after that, they were on to even years. Yeah, that's funny to think about.
Pretty weird, but
So there's a great book called Electric October by Kevin Cook, which is just about this World Series. And this is what he says about Page. Nobody ever knew exactly what to expect from Joe Page. Tall and shifty-eyed, he mixed a 90-plus fastball with an illegal spitball he liked to use on 2-strike counts. After a 9-win season in 1946, he demanded a raise from club president Larry MacPhail. MacPhail came back with a dare. He said, Joe, sign this contract and I'll make you a deal. I'll go to Bucky Harris on payday, the 1st and 15th of each month. If he says Page is my boy, I will hand you $2,500 bills. His offer appealed to the riverboat gambler and Page, who signed. They toasted their pact with a drink. As sports writer John Lardner wrote, Joe had a lot of stuff. He drank a lot of stuff. He was a switch drinker. He could lift a glass with either hand. MacPhail, true to his word, asked Harris about Page's status every 2 weeks. There were 11 paydays between April and October. 8 times Bucky said, Page is my boy. 8 times MacPhail handed 25 crisp hundreds to a smiling Joe Page. So basically, that's what 8 times 2,500 is what, it's 20 grand, I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeez.
In 1947, or what year was it?
47, yeah.
Yeah. So
he won 14 games, saved 17, finished 44. Bill James believes that Page is the first truly modern closer. He says that Harris made Page a reliever. This event, more than any other one thing, brought about the general acceptance of the concept of full-time relievers as a positive asset to the team. Bucky Harris didn't mind a drink himself. He liked to share a post-game whiskey with the writers. And after Page closed out a Yankees win, he'd raise a glass to toast the reliever and say, Gentlemen, Joe Page.
$20,000 in 1947 is equivalent to $265,000 and change today.
Not bad at all. Page only really hangs around a couple of years. I think 49, the first Stengel year, he's a key member of the team, and then after that, he's kind of trails off. There is a great story about spring training in the early Stengel years, where he and a bunch of his teammates, including Snuffy Sternweiss, take him out on a boat to go fishing during spring training, and they tell the boat captain, the guy who's driving the boat, he's in on it. They find out a way to tie Page's fishing line to a bucket in the water, and every time he's just about to reel it in, the boat captain speeds up, and so he can't reel in the bucket. And finally, after like 6 or 7 hours on the water, they reel it in. He reels it in, and he realizes it's a bucket. And for the rest of the season, his teammates would come up to him and say, "Hey, Joe, you want to go bucket fishing tomorrow?" He gets back at Snuffy Sternweiss when they're all at a cabin, maybe during the same spring training or the following winter. He shoots a bear, puts it in the outhouse, knowing that Snuffy Sternweiss is the guy who'll be in the outhouse first thing the next morning. And when Snuffy Sternweiss opens the door to the outhouse, the dead bear falls on him. So
that's pretty good if you can manage it.
They love their pranks. I also just want to note, I just want to go back before we get to the aftermath. I want to go back to Game 5 real quick. Red Barber very much did not believe that it was his job to be a cheerleader, either for his team or for the other team or anything. And so he was very sort of even keeled when Bevins lost the no-hitter and the Dodgers won Game 4. And all he said was, "I'll be a suck egg mule." And that was his very even-handed remark. And his boss at the Columbia Broadcasting System told him that he was very happy with the fact that he had just sort of reported it very calmly and not gotten too emotional. And he thought that Barber did a really good job in calling the game and not getting too emotional about it, as a real newsman should. And this guy should know, because Barber's boss at the time, gentleman by the name of Edward R. Murrow.
I had a feeling that's where you were going. Yeah.
So the Yankees win in 7. The Dodgers vote DeRocher a World Series share, even though he had not managed the team all year. Dodger ownership quickly reverses that decision. Although DeRocher does come back for a time in 1948, clashes with the players, clashes with Robinson. Robinson actually had spent a lot of time on the banquet circuit in the 47 offseason and came to camp overweight. DeRocher doesn't like this. Little known fact that Dodgers actually placed Jackie Robinson on waivers in 1948.
Really?
Nobody signs him, but can you imagine how different American history would be?
Why did they do that?
Because I think he and DeRocher were clashing, and Robinson had gained a bunch of weight and wasn't playing well. 48, not a great year for Robinson. 48's kind of a dip for him, and then he comes back in 49, and in like 49, 50, 51 are where he has his best seasons. And DeRocher says about Robinson something along the lines of, he was thin for Shotton and he's fat for me, or something like that. And so you also see the beginning of the mutual dislike between those two guys. So a lot going on there with the Dodgers in 48. The owner of the Giants, Horace Stoneham, calls Branch Rickey about potentially hiring Shotton in 48, who's still under contract to the Dodgers, even though he's not the manager anymore. And Branch Rickey says to him, how would you like to have DeRocher instead? And so mid-season in 48, DeRocher goes from the Dodgers to the Giants. It's a manager trade between the two National League teams. And 2 or 3 weeks after having managed the Dodgers, DeRocher's managing the Giants. Just a very, very weird situation the following year in 48. The Yankees barely missed the pennant in 1948. They lose out in a 3-team, end of the season pennant race. The Indians beat out both the Yankees and the Red Sox in 48. Ownership, which is Dan Topping and Del Webb. Larry McPhail's gone, which is something we'll talk about in a minute. They start to clash with Harris. They feel that Harris is too loose with his players. He's a little bit too much of a player's manager. So they fire Harris, and they end up bringing in Casey Stengel, who goes on to manage a team for the next 12 years and wins, 7 World Series and
10 pennants.
10 pennants, and wins the 49 World Series, or the 49 pennant, in a last game of the season victory over the Red Sox, who are now managed by Joe McCarthy. Harris goes back and manages the Senators for the 3rd time, eventually makes it into the Hall of Fame. The Dodgers by 49. Robinson has his best season as a pro in 49, hits .342, wins the MVP award. By this time, you got Hodges and Snyder and Ferrillo and those guys, Campanella playing in the lineup every day. You got Don Newcomb coming into his own, who's sort of the ace of the early 50s teams. And so by 49, they truly are kind of the boys of summer Dodger team that everybody knows.
Yep. And then they pick up right where they had left off and losing a bunch of World Series to the Yankees before they finally turned it around in 55. But, this is sort of the precursor to all that.
And I would just note one final thing. Larry McPhail, who we talked about in a previous episode, gets very, very drunk and quits the team at the victory party for the 1947 World Series. Yankees. Harris was shaking hands and accepting praise for winning the World Series. When McPhail barreled into the room, reporters go towards McPhail. He says, stay away or get punched. Earlier, he had burst into tears when the game-ending double play had been turned. He said, we won. I'm quitting. I can't take the pressure anymore. He goes to the Dodger president, to Rickey, and he says, you've got a fine team, and I want to congratulate with you. And then Rickey starts to shake McPhail's hand, and he leans in close, and he says, I'm shaking hands with you because all of these people are watching, but I don't like you. Don't ever speak to me again. After that, McPhail spent several hours with a bottle of scotch. At the Biltmore Hotel, McPhail gets in front of a reporter. He calls Rickey a Bible-quoting, hypocritical, tightwad son of a bitch.
Yeah.
He's not done. He fires the farm director, George Weiss, on the spot because Weiss is talking back to him. This is all at a victory party, keep in mind.
Yeah, they just won the World Series.
Now that they end up hiring Weiss back after McPhail's gone, and he's the general
Wasn't
manager.
Weiss there forever?
He's the general manager of the team into the early 60s, and he's in the Hall of Fame today. McPhail then sits next to a friend of his, John McDonald, who he had known when he was with the Brooklyn Dodgers. He starts ripping into Branch Rickey, and he when McDonald tries to defend Rickey, McPhail yells, "You Judas," and punches him in the eye. Topping tries to intervene. McPhail says, "Hey, Topping, do you know what you are? A guy born with a silver spoon in your mouth who never made $1 in your life." Topping grabs McPhail and says, "I've heard enough from you. We've taken everything we're going to take from you. If you act up again, I'm going to knock your head off." Half an hour later, McPhail sees Joe Page and his wife. He says, "Where were you, Joe, before I picked you up? A bum? You and this broad here, you were nothing." And then what'd you say?
Guy's wife gets it.
And then, according to the journalist, Topping was approaching with a murderous look. Mrs. Page burst into tears. McPhail weaved away, exited the room, and was out of baseball.
I guess if you're gonna go with a flourish, right?
Curses out the other team, curses out his own team, punches a friend.
Guy who just won him the World Series earlier that day. Guy probably wasn't. Guy pitches 5 innings of shutout baseball in Game 7 of the World Series to win the World Series. Probably not expecting the owner to yell at him and his wife after he's like, "What the hell? Like we were just at dinner. Like what the hell happened?"
So, as the book by Kevin Cook says, a very electric October, a very fun World Series, a very modern World Series, groundbreaking in that it's the first World Series to feature an African-American player. It's the beginning of a career. And it's ironic too, because about a decade later, one of Jackie Robinson's last famous World Series moment is that steal a home plate against Yogi Berra when both men are aging legends. So there's some interesting bookends there in the Robinson-Berra World Series rivalry. As we say, Yankees go on to play the Dodgers in the World Series an additional 5 times, winning all but one, which is the Dodgers' famed 55 World Series victory, and the beginning of an era in New York City baseball, the beginning of an era in American history as far as the breaking of the color barrier and all of these things. First game televised. So in some ways, kind of the first modern World Series, and one that's really just a lot of fun. You got blown no-hitters, you got journeyman making great catches, and just you name it. So a really fun World Series that we thought would be worth commemorating on its 75th year anniversary.
Yeah. I learned a lot. I mean, I knew some of this stuff. Obviously, I had researched some unrelated things, so I wasn't as in-depth on the World Series. So I learned a lot. But, yeah, a lot of them tend to blend together because there were so many Yankee-Dodger World Series at the time.
Yeah.
And you tend to think of 41 as like, okay, that one was on an island. But sometimes it's weird to think that 47 and 49 were such different teams. But both teams had different managers, a lot of different personnel. And by 53, a lot of ways, it's totally different teams, let alone 56. And, who knew 10 years later the Dodgers would be gone?
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Almost 10 years later.
Excellent point. All right. Well, happy fall. Happy World Series. This will probably drop sometime in about mid-October, mid to late October. So we hope you all enjoy it. And who knows, maybe the Yankees, the Dodgers, or both will be in the World Series by the time you hear this. So until next time, I am Dan Newman.
And I'm Andrew Newman. Goodbye, old sports.
Hey, everybody. Dan here. Just wanted to break in real quick. At the very end, I predicted that perhaps the Yankees or the Dodgers would be in the World Series by the time this posted. If you're listening, you know that it's actually the Phillies and the Astros. So a tough postseason for both the Yankees and the Dodgers, and a horrible prediction from yours truly. So my apologies for that.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.